Welcome everyone. Today we are at YouTube's New York facility. Shaun King is joining me, so long-time activist, writer for the New York Daily News, avid Black Lives Matter supporter and activist as well. So Shaun, thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you here. I think it's a necessary time that we have this conversation. I've been looking to talk to you for a while. As you know, the work we do at the Young Turks is very in line with what you've been doing as well, and I think that it's great that we can come together and talk about things at such a transitional period in this country. So the dust is settled. We have a new presidential elect in Donald Trump. And I guess just to kick things off, I want to get to so much. I don't want to take your time all day.
Yeah, let's talk, man.
But I want to get to the first thing you've been very vocal with your supporters and the American citizens about what this means, and I know, following you on Twitter, there's so many examples where people are expressing their fear Donald Trump's presidency and what this might mean for them. If you were just to address those people straight away, like just talk to, perhaps it's a black kid who's petrified about his future and the way he's going to be treated, or a Muslim American who is scared that Donald Trump's ban on Muslims might be upheld and these things might happen. Like, how do you address those fears? What would you say to those people that are scared of a Donald Trump presidency?
You know, so much is going through my mind. When we scheduled this, I thought we were going to be having a conversation about how do we hold Hillary Clinton accountable. And even that's what a lot of us were talking about was, hey, we've tried our best to stop Donald Trump. I expected Hillary Clinton to win. I thought there was a possibility that Trump could win, but I thought we were going to immediately pivot to how do we hold Hillary Clinton accountable for the things, for the promises she's made, for the statements that she's made. And I heard Jink and others say the same thing. It's like, hey, when she's elected, we're going to hold her accountable. Mm-hmm. And so very few people, I mean, almost no activists, media companies, organizations really had a plan for what to do in the event that Donald Trump won. Mm-hmm. And so all of the energy, activism, and most of the coverage was, let's stop him. But very few of us thought about what are those conversations that we're going to have? What are the plans that we have to make? I'm reluctant to say that I am afraid, but that's just what I was taught. Like, I was brought up to be fearless and to not say it. I'm deeply concerned. I'm concerned for those young children. I'm concerned for recent immigrants, for Latinos in this country. I'm concerned for women. And people all across the country are already experiencing some of the fallout because Donald Trump's supporters feel emboldened and empowered. And I think what I'm focusing on, though, is the reality that in a little more than 2 months, he will be president. And right now, while we talk, he has a team that he's built, and they're strategizing for how they're going to hit hard the moment he is inaugurated. Yeah. And so I think those fears are valid. And a lot of us, even I have 5 children, and a lot of us over the past few months have talked to our kids, and I've heard it. Our words have been, don't worry, he won't win. And that's kind of been the message, and that's why a lot of parents struggled when they woke up the next morning, because millions of us, our message to our children wasn't, we will protect you. It was, don't worry, he's not going to be president. Yeah. And so here we are having to eat those words and then make real decisions about what we do to stop him in power. Yeah. And the problem is he controls all 3 branches of government. Yeah. And he has his own version of a mandate. Yeah. And they're going to hit the ground running on January the 20th. And anybody who's saying, let's wait and see what he's going to do, is deeply misunderstanding what he stands for and misunderstanding the team he's building. So I think he is going to take steps to make life harder for Muslims in America. He is going to take steps to make life harder for immigrants in this country, and for so many other people groups. And so we have to then immediately say, how do we counteract that? What are the conversations we have? What are the plans we make? And I think we were so unprepared for this possibility that people are just now, a few days later, beginning to shake off being shell-shocked and starting to say, what do we do?
Yeah.
And that's where we are now.
I think that it's very reminiscent to what I experienced on both sides of the pond. I think we talked about it briefly.
Yeah, man.
Like when you see the same thing happen, young voters strongly opposing Brexit, but assuming that the older generation who's wiser and are going to take care of things will handle it, and that their voice isn't as necessary to the fight. When you couldn't be more wrong. If I'm addressing a young voter out there that's thinking about
Right.
it, you've got to be involved. You've got to understand that you cannot rest on your laurels. That's exactly what happened with Brexit. And despite, yes, the popular vote was won by Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump is the president. And you got to understand that your voice is necessary to this, not just to add to conversations and to try and push forward the policy that you would like to see upheld and protest and really get your message across,
Sure.
but to help educate. Like, everyone has a job. Everyone that, in my opinion, that has stood against what Donald Trump stands for has a job to educate the youth in moving forward. So that's kind of what I wanted to get into the next point. I will get onto a conversation about how do we hold Donald Trump accountable for
Sure.
things, but you've experienced, as you mentioned on your Twitter, like so many young kids are going into school the day, 2 days, 3 days after Donald Trump's presidency and experiencing immediate hate. The examples are, they're petrifying. Like, some
Yeah.
of them are clear. They're examples where kids are voicing that they've been touched inappropriately by other kids who are claiming that the president's doing it, so I can do it. So,
And in a lot of ways, those kids who are doing these awful things, like they're some boys grabbed a 10-year-old girl's genitals and said, Donald Trump does it. And that's true.
yeah,
He said he does it. And so we have a long history of people modeling the behavior of the president.
yeah,
And so for the first time in a long time, we have children who can say something like that and be right, and they are modeling the behavior of their incoming president,
yeah,
who was also never held accountable for those actions.
yeah.
So a lot of these kids are going to be in trouble for their actions and mimicking Donald Trump, but parents and teachers and administrators over these past few days have been overwhelmed, and they were also unprepared. Very few schools had an action plan in place for how would kids behave one way or the other. And what they found was, we just today I posted a story about kids in a school who white kids in a school who locked arms and would not let Latino kids into the school, or would not let them into their lockers, would not let them into class. Kids literally who were students who were walking down high school hallways holding Trump signs, chanting white power. And I keep seeing people say that didn't happen, but we've posted videos, we posted photos. The schools have confirmed that these things happened. We at a middle school in Indiana, the students, dozens of white students in the cafeteria were chanting, "Build the wall, build the wall." And you could see the life drain out of the Latino students in that cafeteria, to drain out of their face. And so that this is our reality in America, it infuriates me. And part of what I've tried to do is expose it, to show that this is what a Donald Trump presidency is bringing into our country. And that's what many of us said would happen. And he empowers the worst thoughts, the worst sentiments in our country. He empowers people to embrace bigotry, misogyny, racism, xenophobia, and we're seeing that. There was a young woman at a Walmart, and literally a young Muslim woman and a man came up and ripped her hijab off. And I saw several instances of that happening. And they openly say that they're Donald Trump supporters. These weren't instances that happened and we're now imposing that on them.
Yeah.
These people say that they're doing it because of Trump. And he's refused to address it. And we expected that as well, because he's keenly aware that this is his base. these are the people who voted for him, who fueled his candidacy. So you and I talked about earlier, he's been very careful not to offend or correct the people who are doing this, including, white supremacists and white nationalists and others. He's walked a very fine line of knowing that is his base of support, and he has continued to say nothing about these instances.
Well, that's the point we were kind of touching on there, is that he's almost, in his acceptance speech, in a Donald Trump fashion, he was almost more inclusive than what we've ever seen him, talking about how he needs to address the forgotten people of the United States, and how we need to look at how we uphold the values of every citizen. And then you have white supremacists and world-renowned scumbags like David Duke come out and apologize on the behalf of Donald Trump because he thinks that being inclusive was insulting to the people that he was looking to try and get their vote. And he's like, he doesn't mean it, he's just saying this to make nice, basically. That was his words. And that's what really gets my blood boiling, because I'm not a fool. I don't think every Donald Trump supporter is a racist. I don't think every Donald Trump supporter is a xenophobe or anything else. But what you now get is these people look into Donald Trump's presidency as validation that their values, what they uphold, is right. And anything that they can do now is got that support mechanism because Donald Trump is a president. So this is the next question I wanted to ask, is how do we get, in a way, the message across that Donald Trump, in a way, has to condone these acts in a way that, has to condemn these acts so that people understand that it's not going to be okay moving forward in this country? Because we talked about it again, there's rumours that there's going to be a KKK rally, supported rally in December. You just don't even want to fathom that because it doesn't sound like it's 2016. But do we need Donald Trump to come out? Is that the only way something like this stops if he comes out?
I don't think he will. I don't think, he may occasionally drop small hints that he's not responsible. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we're going to see Donald Trump come out and boldly condemn these things that we're seeing, and he's not going to enforce any type of policy against it. That's just not his way. I mean, we've seen a lot of horrible things happen over the past 18 months, and he said next to nothing about those things. And so, as he moves,
he's encouraged it even.
Yeah. So no, I don't. I see people already asking Donald Trump to condemn these things, and while that might be slightly better than nothing, I think it's a waste of time. I mean, if he felt compelled to condemn them, he would. And I don't think he does. I don't think he cares.
Yeah.
And he does not have a demonstrated, we're talking about a 70-year-old man.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a demonstrated history of caring about hate crimes or racism or bigotry or xenophobia. That's not who he is. And so his team, they are thinking about how they can put in place some really radical policies to change the country. He just appointed this new man to his transition team who was Secretary of State in Kansas. Yeah. And even in his comments today, he was saying how the Donald Trump administration is going to be 180 degrees different than the Obama administration on policies, on tone, and I think we're going to see it. And so you're not going to see a man who is planning on cracking down on the very people who now feel harmed. You're not going to see him offer real olive branches. So like last night, for instance, Donald Trump made a harsh statement about protesters. And then a few hours later, he made a weird tweet about how he was glad they were there. And so what you see is Donald Trump say what he really means, and then somebody says, hey, you shouldn't have said that. Yeah. And then he offers something, kind of a kind gesture.
Yeah.
And so I don't believe him. Even with his acceptance speech, I didn't take his word for it that he's going to try to be president of everybody. And I sympathize with people who are saying he's not my president. Obviously that's not how a democracy works, that you don't have to accept him as your president for him to be the president. And so he's going to be inaugurated. He's going to be the president. But I understand those folk. Like, I look at him and think, he's not my president.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, including President Obama and Hillary Clinton and others, have been critical of people saying, hey, he's not my president. But I get it. I mean, you look at him and see his policies, his character, and see what he's encouraged, and it makes me want to fully reject him.
Yeah.
And so when people chant, "Not my president," I get it.
Yeah.
And yet and still, I'm aware that it doesn't require our acceptance for him to be inaugurated. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so
absolutely.
here we are.
And so there's a lot of points that I've taken from this that really hit home. Is like a lot of the time people were using Hillary Clinton as a means to justify Donald Trump's presidency because she wasn't the ideal candidate. And but then I just looked at it from more of a personal level, and the youth and who these people that are going to be coming into this generation and looking to try and shape our future. And we drive these messages home to them at an early age that don't bully, don't pick on people, don't judge anyone by their skin color, don't treat women any differently. If I'm talking about a man, don't treat men any differently. And you just have a president that disregards any of those notions and is now in the most prestigious position that anyone can be in the world, literally in charge of the last superpower. So what are the steps that we can take on that level to try and encourage these young kids moving forward to understand that there is a different way, that we need to understand different cultures? Is it as much as that we really need to start shaping the way we teach kids about the history of our country from such an early age? From what I understand, the first thing I did when I came to this country was I took classes in Native American studies, and I took classes on black history because I was just so engrossed and I wanted to understand these past cultures. And I didn't get that chance when I was in the United Kingdom. I didn't learn enough about the history that made different perceptions kind of come to fruition. And I feel that that's such a major problem in this country, that people don't understand different cultures because they're not taught it. Like you mentioned it yourself, like how many of these Trump supporters that are in areas where they claim that immigration is going to come and cause a problem in their lives probably have never even ran into an immigrant, probably have rarely had a conversation with a Hispanic or a black person. So their views, they don't really care about it that much. They just are validated by a president coming out and saying these things that they want to hear.
Yeah.
So is there plans that we can put in place to help bridge that gap at such an early age and start to get kids as informed about different cultures as soon as possible?
Well, that's a great question. And I think Donald, we have to understand that in a couple months, Donald Trump's picture is going to be on the walls of every school in America. And it's going to be on the walls of every government building. That's where the American president is. And like even when I heard the press secretary, the White House press secretary call him President Trump, or when I saw the press conference where Trump and Obama were sitting just like we are right now, it was heartbreaking to see President Obama sitting next to a man who had insulted him, insulted his very humanity, his identity, questioned his legitimacy as a president, as a citizen. To see the president sitting next to him, it's a great teachable moment for people who want to teach the full truth about American history. That sometimes we have amazing people with great character who are presidents, and sometimes we've had presidents who own human beings while they're president. And that, Donald Trump, I put in that category of somebody who has a demonstrated history of bad character, who is still elected to the highest office. And so a lot of the way we teach American history is dishonest. And, it's a brutal history. It's often a violent history. And Donald Trump gives us an opportunity to teach children, and I have 5 kids from age 4 to 17, and we kind of have, my wife and I, and my wife's a school teacher, we have like a sliding scale of how much we teach our kids. So our 4-year-old does not even know Donald Trump exists. And she does
Lucky
not.
Her.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she lives in this wonderful bubble where she does not know about bigotry or xenophobia or racism. She does not. All she knows is that she is loved and valued, and that's what we want. And then it slides up. Our 7-year-old knows a little, and our 10-year-old knows more, and then our teenage girls pretty much know it all.
Yeah.
And we try to educate them on the truthful, often violent, problematic history of this country and of the world. But what I'm encouraging I'm excited when I see young people protesting. All across this country, high school students, the day after Trump was elected, walked out to say, this is not who we would have chosen. They weren't even of voting age.
Yeah.
And they just said, we are, and this happened, in the UK as well. Just say hey, we are angry that you all voted this person in as our president. Even here in New York and around the world, protests have been happening every day.
Yeah.
So that's one step, but we have to think, what are the other steps that we take to stop him, to stop his policies, and those are very difficult questions.
Yeah, I think that's a great transition to really get into something that, let's be honest, man. I'm as progressive as they come, but blame has to be directed towards the Democrats as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that as much as I've been a huge fan of Barack Obama as well, we've had a black president in charge now 2 terms, and I still think there's a lot of more issues that I would have preferred him address, especially in the last year or so. I think that the first thing to talk about is the Dakota pipeline is something that I think he should have been addressing. It's a clear issue that we've covered extensively on the Young Turks. Jordan's did some fantastic reporting being up there. I think that these are the small issues that we talked about, that on a broader scale, when you have a black president in the White House, I don't think that symbolizes the progression that we think it symbolizes. I think it symbolizes that we've got someone of color in the White House. So that's great.
And we have to understand that 63% of white folk in America voted against him in 2012. Yeah. So it wasn't like all of America chose him anyway. Yeah. I mean, both of those elections were close to 50-50 each time. Yeah. And so it wasn't like it was a progression. It was an evolution. It was an evolution. But I think we imposed a lot of our hopes and dreams on him when he never quite said he was going to be all that we wanted him to be in the first place. And so a lot of us are deeply disappointed. But some of that disappointment comes from we made some assumptions about him, that as a politician, that he was going to be an aggressive liberal, a pronounced progressive, and we've learned that's not quite his style. Yeah, it's not that he doesn't care. I believe he does. But the things that progressives are often unified around, we often have struggled to find an ally in him. Yeah, and part of his style is always, and I get it, and a lot of people say, well, when you become president, it moderates you. And you and I wouldn't know because we're not president. Yeah. But he always speaks to both sides of every issue, when sometimes there is a right and there's a wrong. And sometimes it's like, hey, if a police officer does something horrible, come out and say it's horrible. You're not required to also say, but most officers are great. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about police brutality. And so with the Dakota Access Pipeline and so many other issues, the Democratic Party, what we found was that it was never the Democratic Party who really cared about those, be it the fight for 15 and this fight for minimum wage. Yeah. A huge movement all over the country that had very little to do with Hillary Clinton or the Democratic Party. The Dakota Access Pipeline, it has thousands, maybe millions of young people see that. Every college I speak at, if I even mention it, it gets almost a standing ovation. Yeah. Because people are just glad that someone knows. You have all of these issues that irritated, hurt, and bothered young people and progressives, and Hillary Clinton, no one was ever convinced that she cared about those things. Whereas Donald Trump very masterfully found the pain points that bothered the voting base that he was trying to appeal to, and consistently fabricated this narrative to convince them that he cared. Yeah. That he cared about jobs in poor communities. He has no demonstrated history of caring about that. That he cared about goods being manufactured in the United States, when he has a demonstrated history of making all of his products somewhere else. But he said the right things, and people believed him. Hillary Clinton, not only did people struggle to believe her, she rarely even said the right things about the Dakota Access Pipeline, about Black Lives Matter, about the fight for 15, and 10 other issues that we could talk about. And so she could have excited, and the Democratic Party could have excited the base in ways that I just don't even think she or the party was capable of doing. And so that's why a lot of us have transitioned to say, we need to fire all of them. They lost maybe the most important election in our lives. They now lost control of the Senate. The House they created a bigger lead in the House, and we now have Donald Trump as our president. And there were so many missed opportunities. And it was the first time in my lifetime where young people chose one candidate, Bernie Sanders, sometimes 8-1, 9-1, and the Democratic establishment said, nah, we don't want him. That's never happened before. Yeah. So young people chose Barack Obama, and if you go back to almost every election, when a Democrat has won, it was the Democrat that young people preferred. Yeah. And even though young people fueled Bernie's movement, older voters ruined that. Yeah. And so when she won, Democrats did not know how to bridge that gap. Yeah. And that's partly responsible for her loss.
Well, when you look at it, it's one thing if that older generation prefers a certain candidate, because everyone's got the right to their opinion, but it's another thing when the committee that you're entrusting that they give you a fair and just election is against a candidate that has been driving a message that he stood by since the very moment that he got into politics. Rarely flirted with his opinions, really stood for civil rights, for trying to push forward. He was with her before anyone else was really with her. He was pushing those same rights towards equal rights for women from an early age. So he ticked all the boxes for the young candidates. And we could make our peace if we were just outvoted. But it wasn't that case. The people like Donna Brazile in the DNC, you have the Podesta emails which have stated that there was just an agenda towards Bernie Sanders that we will never forgive. And to the point where, as you were mentioning and alluding to, Democrats, progressives, liberals, some of them are blaming Trump voters, which I understand. Some of them are blaming no voters, which again I understand. Some of them are even blaming third-party voters, which if you look into the stats, it wouldn't have adjusted.
Yeah, that doesn't hold water.
It doesn't hold water. The people you should be blaming is the DNC. Yeah. And that's only where my frustration lay 2 nights ago. That's only where my frustration was. Sure. It wasn't directed towards anyone else. And I do want to get to a couple of questions on the Trump supporters that are coming out, and they're facing some adversity. People are coming and calling them racist and xenophobes, and they never voted for any of that. They don't uphold those values. And I want to get across what we would say to those people.
Yeah, because I mean, you and I may disagree on that point, but I fully hold the DNC responsible. I think those who voted for Trump, for me, are primarily responsible. Like when you vote for a candidate, he won because he won the Electoral College, but the DNC failed on 10 different levels, and we forget already that Debbie Wasserman Schultz resigned in disgrace. Yeah. When before these Podesta emails were released, other emails were released showing them making insulting comments about Bernie Sanders. Yeah. That 3 top executives at the DNC were also fired for the very same thing, that they were going back and forth insulting Bernie during the Democratic primary. And all of us saw that it was, and we saw it for months and months, that it was skewed toward her winning. Mm-hmm. And then when they replaced Debbie Wasserman Schultz and those others with Donna Brazile, even people in Bernie's campaign said they felt good about it. Mm-hmm. And only for us to find out that Donna Brazile was not once but on multiple occasions feeding Hillary's campaign questions from the debates, just terribly unethical, which shows that she was also biased, as Debbie Wasserman Schultz and others. It's not that she's not a good person, it's not that she doesn't have a good history, but that the campaign, and we've said it was rigged toward her winning. And also with superdelegates. Yeah. Before the damn campaign even began, she already had almost 350 superdelegates committed to her. Yeah. And so it was almost impossible for Bernie to win because of the way they set up the system, the way they managed it. Yet and still, he still won 21 contests, and when it ended, they really had no real plan, the DNC or Hillary's campaign, to honestly, earnestly win those voters back. And so I wrote an op-ed then saying, hey, after this election, I don't want to be a part of the Democratic Party ever again. And that still holds for me. Like, I don't want anything to do with what they're doing. Obviously, Bernie and others, and even myself, are promoting them appointing Keith Ellison. And that would be something that could win someone like me and a lot of other people back. If they put Howard Dean as the head of the DNC, I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want anything to do. Howard did many ugly things during the campaign. He said ugly stuff. He's deeply cozy with lobbyists and others, and he's very problematic. And so it's a test. Are they going to try to go to the future, or are they going to continue doing the same things they've always been doing? Congressman Keith Ellison represents what I think could be a new Democratic Party.
Yeah.
He's truly progressive. He's close with Bernie in the campaign. He understands all these issues we just talked about.
Yeah.
The Dakota Access Pipeline, the issues in Flint with water and others, the fight for 15. As a practicing Muslim, he deeply cares about issues of xenophobia and other things. So it's a rare opportunity that Democrats have to win people back who basically right now feel like giving them the middle finger.
Yeah.
And I feel like they put us all in grave danger by this foolish campaign that they ran.
Yeah.
And so we'll see. They're going to have to make those decisions very quickly. I think we've seen the end of the Clinton era. But now people are already floating out that they want Chelsea Clinton to run for Congress. And it's like, I read that article today, and that's her business and that's her decision. But they are clearly insistent on keeping the Clintons in politics, the establishment in politics, no matter what.
Well, nothing would be more representative of the DNC if they lose to a candidate who you attach any of those scandals on any other real candidate, and they would probably be impeached. Any other president or anyone else in the world who would have said or did anything that Donald Trump has done, they would have been impeached or lost their power. And the DNC lost to him. That's how hard. You need to really understand that they lost to that candidate. But it would be very much like the DNC if they just played that off and just went forward with their same old agenda. But they might do it. They will try, but I'm a little bit more optimistic to that. I think that Bernie Sanders' revolution was always greater than this election.
Sure.
I think that it was always greater than this. Like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Ellison, these are the type of people that are going to represent what I would hope the DNC will be going forward. These are the type of people that represent the Democratic Party. I did a full video. I was almost at night rocking myself to sleep when I thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be in charge, with the hope that Elizabeth Warren would maybe be Secretary of Treasury, maybe would be in a position where she could really uphold some of her fantastic political skills and her great knowledge.
We were talking about, it was just a few weeks ago, the thought was, if Hillary wins and Democrats take the Senate, that Bernie Sanders is going to be in charge of the Budget Committee. Instead, he's not.
Yeah.
She's not. We will not have Elizabeth Warren in this administration. Instead, they're talking about Chris Christie and Rudy Giuliani, and we're talking about Sheriff David Clark from Milwaukee and Sheriff Joe from Phoenix and Ben Carson, Sarah Palin. Like, they are legitimately talking about having a cabinet position for Sarah Palin.
Yeah.
And so it is legitimately terrifying.
Yeah.
That instead of it being Cory Booker and Elizabeth Warren or who else, that we're talking about this other cast of characters.
It was always broader for me, as much as it was like Donald Trump was enough to scare people. It was always broader for me. I always look at things, take a step back and think, okay, this is a mouthpiece
Sure.
What's behind the mouthpiece, right? What's behind, is it Paul Ryan, is it the speaker, who took a step back, I think very strategically, to allow him to do what he had to do, and then he's going to come back in and uphold very similar values. Don't think that that's any different. But it's the building of the cabinet around him, the Chris Christies, the Rudy Giulianis of the world, the Mike Pence, who's petrifying enough for me for his values on the people of the LBGT community. So these are all scary thoughts, but I wanted to get back to what we discussed, and I think there's a possibility we might disagree. I think I might have worded it a little different, but it's how do we address those that are, and I know them in numbers, they've coming out that they are not racist, not xenophobic, not sexist, that they just voted for a candidate that they felt upheld their best possible chance at a better future for them. Maybe it's someone who's been through some hard times in the middle class and want to look to maybe get jobs back, as Donald Trump has vocalized, and as Trump's recent statements, he's going to get rid of the TPP. Maybe it's someone that's, again, tired of the establishment, tired of these.
Even that was Donald very smartly understanding that was something points. Bernie did well, and that Hillary could not do well convincingly, and so he began to parrot those pain points, those pressure points. Well, of course, I believe that there are millions of Americans who are struggling. Like, I come from rural Kentucky, a small factory town. My mother worked in a light bulb factory there for 45 years. Both of my grandparents worked in a factory as well for their entire lives. My uncles and cousins live deep in rural Kentucky, and they worked in coal mines for most of their lives. And so I understand what people feel when jobs are lost, when the economy has tanked and they're struggling. I understand what it's like for their health insurance prices to be sky high. All of that is definitely true, and millions of Americans are absolutely experiencing the pain that Donald Trump talks about. But for me, it is also true that you could not have voted for him and been unaware of how deeply he had offended and created policies that were offensive and toward women and Muslims and African Americans and other people of color and immigrants. Because we have the longest campaigns in the United States in the world. Yeah. And most people don't even understand that around the world, campaigns often tend to be 2 to 3 months. And, we're talking about an 18-month, almost 2-year-long campaign. And you could not have voted for him and been unaware of the support that he got from white supremacists and why that support existed. It was widely reported. And for me, if you voted for him, in spite of all of those things, it was a vote understanding, yes, I know that he will probably be problematic for these 10 groups of people, but I am choosing to support him anyway. And when people choose to do that, they are choosing to throw those other people under the bus for their own best interests. Yeah. And I have a problem with that. And so it may be, that person may be able to say, Shaun, I am not a bigot. I am not a xenophobe. I am not a sexist. But when you cast your vote for a man who is all of those things, it causes me to question, while you may not be bigoted, you're also not against it. You may not hate Muslims, but you sure aren't for them and for their protection. You may not be sexist, or you may not understand that you're sexist, but you damn sure aren't for the protection of women. Yeah. And you voted for him. So a lot of people very conveniently have found ways to say, but I'm not A, B, C, D, or E. You know me. Yeah. But when you cast your vote for him, it means something painful. So, case in point, this was the first heartbreaking personal moment that I had after the election. In high school, and I grew up in a town called Versailles, Kentucky. And there was a teacher that I had there, sweetest white woman who loved me and helped protect me from a lot of bigotry and racism there in the school. I don't know why she felt the need to write me and tell me, but she wrote me and told me the following day that she had voted for Donald Trump. And I need people to understand how I felt. Like, I have known this lady now, I'm 37, I've known her for 22 years. I immediately unfriended her on Facebook. I personally do not trust anyone who voted for Donald Trump. I don't trust you. I don't trust you personally. I told her, I said, are you aware that the CEO of Donald Trump's campaign, Steve Bannon, has personally led attacks against me for 2 years? And I said, were you aware of that? And she basically said yes. And I said, well, at the point in which you claim to love me, but vote for a man whose CEO hates me, we can't be friends. Yeah. And so, for a lot of us, we are faced with the reality that if you support someone who stands for what he stands for, other people might not understand it. I can't be friends with you. No, and those are my personal decisions.
No, I understand. Know? I understand that completely. I'm with everything that you're saying. My discrepancy is the treatment of those people who have acknowledged that they voted for Donald Trump. They don't personally stand by all those things, but they voted them, whether it be for their own agenda. They maybe are taxed too much, or they don't have enough jobs. Like, I don't think we make any sort of strides as a society if we condemn them. What I think we make strides as a society, because we have proven that this divide is just mind-boggling. It's the most divided this country's been in a long time. So my plan in place for whenever I talk to anyone that comes up to me, and I've talked to many that say, I'm a Republican, I'm not against immigrants. I'm an immigrant right here, right now. I'm an immigrant in this country. So I feel injustices. I'm not going to, by any means, put myself in the same category as someone that's going to face the injustices.
Yeah, because Donald Trump's problems, we know, are not really with immigrants, because he marries them.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not even a joke.
It's not
just
white
true.
Immigrants.
His problem is with immigrants of color, particularly if they're from particular locations. And that's what he's even said. Like, so I get that. And I'm thankful that there are people like you who, see, we all don't need to be doing this the same way. Absolutely. And so I'm grateful that there are people like you who say, hey, I'm going to try to be a bridge and to people in a way that helps build that bridge. That's not the route I'm going to take. Yeah. Like, now I am completely against physically attacking anybody. Yeah. I'm completely against any physical violence against people because of who they voted for. Like, I despise that in any way. I use the phrase from Dr. King all the time that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Yeah. And I believe that. I live that out. Deep, ugly insults, and those, like, I'm against that. However, I have a problem with someone who says, I love immigrants, but I voted for Donald Trump. When it's like when an abusive spouse says, I know what I did to you, but I love you. Yeah. And it's, and there's a phrase we use that says, love is a verb. Love is what you show, it's what you live. Mm-hmm. And and so I think there's this passive nature of people saying, well, I don't actively hate these people, but don't tell me you love them.
No.
You don't love immigrants, you don't love people of color, not you. You don't, and I hear that. And what people, it's easy for that to come out of your mouth. And what it almost always tells me is what we just said. You probably are in deep relationships with immigrants who are terrified right now. Mm-hmm. You probably are not in deep relationships with people of color who are terrified because Donald Trump has said he wants a national policy on stop and frisk. Mm-hmm. He wants to federalize racial profiling. Mm-hmm. And so when you never are going to be the recipient of that, it's really easy to say, hey, I voted for him because of trade and jobs. I don't buy it.
No. And but the only thing that I'm trying to find this understanding is, just as you have done, I'm watching this back and forth, and I don't think it's going to get any sort of progress made. I think that the more we protest, it's necessary. The more we vocalize our outrage at these things is necessary. But I want to hold Republicans accountable that if they believe that they didn't vote specifically for those things, then they have an obligation. That if they see any Republican fellow to them that actually upholds this is where I differ from a lot of people, is that they have an obligation to uphold their values. And this is what I'm going to talk about, Shaun, is I think that in this country, American citizens are at times oblivious to how much your political outlook shapes your whole life from the moment you're raised. It's to the point that it's like a religion. So when you're raised Catholic, and then all of a sudden that Catholicism that you're raised doesn't stand for the very similar beliefs that what you are raised on, they start to maybe hate different groups, and they start to condemn others and scapegoat. It's very hard to bring yourself when then that's all you know. And Fox News is your news, and CNN is your news. There's no place that you can go to get neutral news in this country. It's like you need to go, unless you're reading newspapers, unless you're getting understanding, is that it's fueled by bias. It's left or it's right. So what I'm saying is these people that are raised on these values, they don't know any better. So when they see a candidate like Donald Trump, and he upholds all these things that they don't necessarily believe in, and they probably, a lot of them don't like, but again, their mindset doesn't work in a way that they can understand that they can vote for another party, because it's almost like you're betraying everything that you know. So I think that there's such a fundamental problem in this country where people start to they really don't realize that there is some sort of middle ground. There can be some way to take even some policies that you understand from a Republican Party and potentially get them upheld whilst upholding really progressive values that actually benefit human beings more so than anything else. And I think the only way you start to get that middle ground is by making a connection and starting to understand that you may be a Republican who understands this, but you have a right now. If you voted for this man in charge, who, by the way, if this is before the election, I'm going to try and change as many votes as I can. But the election's happened. It's 4 years now. And I think if we keep this back and forth, there's going to be more bloodshed. It's going to be a horrible place, even more so horrible than we imagine. So I think Republicans have an important job. Right-wing conservatives who voted for this have an important job to condemn these acts. They see any sort of violence that upholds anything that Donald Trump has stood by, or the scapegoating. They're just, if they didn't vote for that, then they should be coming out and condemning it.
We'll see. I mean, we should hold them responsible to the values that they claim they
voted
have.
For.
But my problem with that is that's really something you particularly do before the election. Like, you pick the candidate that represents your values. And now that he is about to be inaugurated, I'm not saying it's too late to be a critic, or it's too late to. How do you hold, as a Republican, how do you hold him accountable when he has the power of the Oval Office? Like, it's been very difficult for progressives and liberals to hold Barack Obama accountable in any meaningful way, to say, hey, we thought you were going to do A, B, or C. That's been a very difficult thing to do. It's going to be just as hard with Donald Trump. And so, we need bridge builders, and we need people to keep like all lines of communication open. But I'm not there yet. Yeah, not at all.
I'm not expecting you to be. I just think that there's the power of perception is something that people need to understand is such a useful tool when it comes to stuff like this, because you need to. What I felt my job was as soon as I came to this country and I understood the prejudice is, for the first 2 years, I think, when I started to really understand the different problems that people face in this country based on the colour of their skin, based on their ethnicity, it was my job, and I say this every time I'm on the platform, to listen and only listen.
Sure, man.
Like, don't judge anyone when I don't understand it. And the same thing comes out is, it's where it's a conflict, because when I come out and say that I need to start helping and try to bridge this gap and try to really, now that we're in this predicament, I think that there is some right in saying that we need to find out ways that we can try to batten down the hatches and really try and get through this. At the same time as, yes, I agree with people that need to protest it, because I think that it is something so disgraceful that you have to protest. But I made it my duty to listen, and I would love, at times I would love if more white people in this country really just tried to listen. I think that there is a problem. At the same time as if we start to listen a little bit more, I think we would really help in moving forward. But I think that it's so necessary that we have organizations at the grassroots level moving up that try to educate those on what's going on in the world to really push forward. And that's what I wanted to get into my next conversation is Black Lives Matter. I've did countless videos debunking All Lives Matter. I think it's the most atrocious thing that has ever really come out as a way to silence those that have spent their full lives being silenced. That's all it was, is a reminder that your voice doesn't matter. So I'm completely with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything it stands for. Where does it go in a Trump presidency?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, and thanks for asking that question, and I think in a lot of ways, Donald Trump was elected in response to America's first black president. That if you never had Barack Obama elected, I don't see any, like, I'm a historian by trade and training, and that's, my bachelor's and advanced degrees are in history, and so I don't see any path to the presidency for Donald Trump if you don't have Barack Obama. That he is a direct response. His political entry into this country was really as a birther questioning the citizenship and legitimacy of President Obama. And so you don't have Donald Trump without Barack Obama. And I'm also not even sure that you have Donald Trump without Black Lives Matter. I think that in a lot of ways, he is a response from white America to the first black president and what is in essence the modern day civil rights movement. And so what you always see after a great innovation, be it after the Civil War, after Reconstruction in America, after the Civil Rights Movement, you always see a dangerous swing of the pendulum in another direction, where after the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power movement, you go from John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and then this hope that Americans had in Robert Kennedy before he was assassinated, to Richard Nixon. And so you see this dramatic swing of a progressive swing in America, and then people respond through their presidential vote. And so Donald Trump is a response to that. And our job in the Black Lives Matter movement, and as people who care about the plans, the policy ideas, the positions that we take, first is to recognize the threat that we feel we're about to face, be it with Homeland Security and the FBI and NSA and others. Like, we feel that we will immediately be targets. Donald Trump is floating out the idea of appointing Sheriff David Clark from Milwaukee, who's been a personal opponent of mine, who has said deeply inflammatory things about the Black Lives Matter movement, who even made statements saying Black Lives Matter movement should be wiped from the face of the earth. That's a quote. And imagine him now in charge of Homeland Security. What does he mean by that? How do you wipe us from the face of the earth? So I wrote an article just a few days before Trump was elected saying that I believe very strongly that a lot of our personal safety is now going to be at risk if I said it then, if he is elected. And now that he has been elected, a lot of us are asking ourselves tough questions. What does that mean for us? But all the things that were problematic for us, be it issues of police brutality or racial discrimination, issues of education and employment, we feel all those problems, not only will they continue to exist, but they'll get worse. I've always felt we're not at the end of the Black Lives Matter movement, we're at the beginning. That in 1955 and 1956, Dr. King and Rosa Parks started the Montgomery bus boycott. And for a lot of people, they use that as the front bookend of the civil rights movement. Well, the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act did not pass until 1965 and 1966, 10 years later. So we're just 2 years into this movement, and we are just beginning to scratch the surface of what we'll do, who we'll become, what changes we'll make. But we feel that the vote to elect Donald Trump was an attack on our humanity and on what this movement stands for, and a direct attack from Trump, but from Steve Bannon, from David Clark, and other Trump supporters. So all the work that we've done, we'll continue to do, louder, stronger. We'll have to organize better. The first 2 years of this movement were spent making the world aware of why a movement even needed to exist. now most of the world accepts that there are grave injustices against black folk in this country. But now we have to shift from awareness to change. We have to go from being outraged to being organized. And that's where we are. And so you'll see we're already in this pivot, and now the need to make those pivots that need is stronger than ever with Donald Trump as president.
So this is a question that I think I know the answer to, but it's just kind of for the audience out there, because this is a go-to response, is that many people who are opposed to the Black Lives Matter movement, or maybe not even as much opposed, but they just think there's also other issues that go along with the Black Lives Matter movement, is that they feel that they don't pay attention enough to black-on-black crime. What would your response be to someone that poses that question? Because as we know, I mean, everyone who's understanding of the problems that are faced in the black community, a lot of it has to do with history, has to do with education, has to do with segregation, it has to do with a lot of these things that play a massive role in it. If you educate yourself on it, maybe watch the 13th, the documentary, which is a phenomenal documentary. Sure. Another form of education. You really start to understand that it's not just as cut and dry as, or maybe if they stopped attacking each other, then maybe we would stop looking at them as criminals. It's not as easy just to tarnish it as that. But I wanted to ask you that question because I'm really interested in your response.
It's a question I get a lot because it's a familiar, almost meme or trope among conservatives.
Deflection at times.
Yeah, deflection to say, but you don't even care about black-on-black crime. And so there are probably three things that I normally say in response to that. And people often also use Chicago. Well, what do you think about violence in Chicago? Well, number one, the moment someone asks me about violence in Chicago and why aren't we doing anything about it, or crime in inner cities and why we aren't doing anything about it, it immediately tells me that you've probably never been to Chicago. Maybe you've never even been to an inner city, because had you been to Chicago, had you been to an inner city, you would know that Chicago and other cities don't have dozens, but have hundreds and sometimes thousands of organizations, not only fighting issues of crime and safety, but have after-school programs, youth education leagues, youth sports leagues, that are doing everything they can to make life in those communities better. You've probably never been to a funeral of someone affected by that violence, because then you would understand that of course people care about violence in our communities. Families are devastated by violence in black communities everywhere. So when people say, why don't you all care? It immediately tells me you don't know us, and you've probably never been, because had you been, you'd know just how much we care. Secondly, it tells me that you don't understand the nature of violence in America. That almost all violence, between 85 and 95% of all violence in America, is intraracial. White people mainly kill white people, black folk mainly kill black folk, Latinos mainly kill Latinos. Rarely does it jump that fence. Almost exclusively in America, all crime stays within racial groups. That's just how it is. And so you don't see, the same people asking us, why aren't you doing A, B, C, or D about black-on-black crime? We could throw that question back on them. And where is your outrage about white-on-white crime? I said on my Twitter stream this week, in the past 7 days, we've had, in essence, what is the deadliest week for police in America in years. And almost 100% of the police who've been killed have been killed by other white men. And we're talking about all over the country. And we've heard almost no outrage from conservatives about it, which even calls me to question how much they even care about police in the first place. And then lastly, most people who bring up black-on-black crime, it's not because they actually care about it. It's not because they want to help or they want to make a difference. It's just because they want to shut down the conversation altogether. And so you use the word deflection, and I would agree with that. But it doesn't come from a place of sincerity.
No.
It's not because they are trying to be a part of the solution. It's actually a form of soft bigotry to distract from the real problems that exist.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to. I've done videos on why All Lives Matter is it's a reminder to black people that this is something that you've faced since your inception in this country, and this is something that the white America is always going to to bring up. They're always going to try to find means to get away from the real core issue.
Sure, man.
I mean, just look at Colin Kaepernick, for example. Like, one of my main focuses on the Young Turks was to bring light to how those that oppose Colin Kaepernick were relatively silent when it came to the brutal police shootings in the country. And I felt that if you're going to insert yourself into a conversation, then you better hold yourself accountable to talk on every issue, especially if you're talking about him protesting something. If you're talking about the way he's protesting something, you better understand the why, because it's the why that matters. It's not about whether he's kneeling in a football game, whether he's standing out in the street, or whether he's screaming from the rooftops. It's about why he's protesting.
Yeah, man.
And if you deflect away from it, then you're part of the problem. And that's what I think we need to talk about. But we've been going for a while, and it's been great talking to you. But I do want to get to it's been 1 hour, we've been knocking from behind. The last couple of questions I want to get from the Twitter audience.
Let's do it,
I did promise them. So Shaun's very popular on Twitter, so you can make sure to check that out. But I tweeted out that I was going to be on the show with Shaun talking about it, and people flooded me with questions. So there's a couple of good ones.
I'll try to take as many as we can, and then I'll give short answers, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can.
So this is the first one, which is a good one. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but I know you were a little bit skeptical as to what he would do this. So at Francis Maxwell, at Shaun King, how important is it for Donald Trump to denounce hate crimes? Is it too late? Is America now a culture of hate?
He should denounce them, and he should consistently denounce them. Eventually his cabinet should do the same. I'm deeply skeptical that they'll do it.
Yeah.
I mainly see Donald Trump supporters questioning whether or not they're even real.
Yeah.
And I've talked to these families. I have engaged them. Like I have talked to people through their tears, their fear, their devastation. And so, of course, on social media, you will always get instances of people posting fakeness or whatever. But most of these are real and very painful. And so he should denounce them, but I'm not hopeful that he'll do that.
Yeah. Next one, again, another one we kind of talked about, so you'll be happy, audience, that we covered most of these in depth. But how do you get the DNC to put someone like Keith Ellison in charge?
Well, I think what they're going to see is that there is a movement behind Keith Ellison, and there's not a movement behind anybody else.
Yeah.
And it gets to the very fabric of what the Democratic Party needs to understand, is that there are millions of people who care about the issues that Bernie highlighted, that the Young Turks constantly highlight, that I highlight. And there's not really a movement for this other stuff. And so already I've seen thousands of people chime in on how Keith needed to be who they got behind. You don't see that same thing for Howard Dean or anybody else. And so it is a pivotal moment for the Democratic Party. And so if you find Keith's social media, or if you even find Bernie's social media, there are already petitions that people can sign. There are status updates that you can share, and I would encourage people to do that.
That kind of leads into the next question, which I think will be a great one to kind of to go out on, is what organizations can we get involved in if we want to enact change?
Wow, that is a great question. I've learned so much over these past 2 years, and I've been saying something. I'm on a college speaking tour, and so over the next week I speak at Georgetown in D.C. I'll be at University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and I've been saying something, and I believe it now more than ever. I've been telling people that most of the change that we want to see happen is going to happen on the local level. And I said that before Donald Trump. I said that with the expectation that Hillary Clinton would be president, that possibly Democrats would control the Senate. Now, none of that exists. So most of the change that we want to see happen, it's not going to come from Donald Trump, of course. It's not going to come from Congress, who has enacted very little change in most of our lifetime. It's going to happen on the local level. And I mean that city by city, state by state. But when I say local, I really do mean in your city. And your burden will be to find what are the local organizations, what are the local changes, what are the local policies, who are the local leaders. Right now, most of the leadership that Democrats have that they love are going to be local people in your city council, your local mayor. But there are 20,000, if we just talk about police brutality, for instance, there are 20,000 police departments all across America. And the changes that you want to see happen to those police departments tend to be local. That your local city council, your local mayor, safety board, sheriff's offices, they are the ones who can enact those changes. And so for all of the people who are watching, they need to ask themselves, locally, who is that? Who are the change makers in my city? What are those organizations locally? And so on the national level, even what we're doing now is trying to inspire people to see the world in a certain kind of way, but people have to bear that burden themselves to find those local organizations. There are very few national organizations that are doing, work that I love. It's these local folk fighting on the grassroots level. But I would encourage people to continue to fight for, $15 minimum wage, and find what that means for you locally. Continue to stand against the Dakota Access Pipeline. And with Donald Trump elected president, a lot of the wind has been sucked out of the attention that we were giving to that. And we need to get back to that. Yeah. But continue to fight for change on the local level.
All right, man. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure. I think that we need more voices like yourself. Of course, the Young Turks emulates a lot of what you guys are doing to try and really, not in a way make light of this really harsh situation, but we all need to come together to try and think of possible ways that we can make this better, that we can try to understand the best possible means to go forward and educate the youth and all these things that are really going to be crucial in trying to help, I would say, this country persevere, because that's the only word I can kind of try to put forward for the next 4 years, is to persevere and see where it goes. But it's been a pleasure.
Thank you,
Make sure to check out Shaun, all his work on Twitter at Shaun King, and all of his writings really is great. And come back, of course, to the Young Turks.